Hello, this is Jonathan Agnew with the Test Match Special podcast on BBC Sounds. We're going through the archive of our favourite View from the Boundary interviews from the last 40 years, hearing from actors, musicians, politicians and all sorts of others who've joined us on the programme to discuss their lives and their love of cricket. Today, we're rewinding to June 2007 and the test between England and West Indies at Old Trafford. Fresh from a disastrous tour to Australia in the winter, Michael Vaughan's side were on their way to a thrilling 60-run win, aided by young centurion Alistair Cook, as well as Monty Panesar, who took 10 wickets in the match. In the commentary box, we were joined by one of the more controversial figures in British life, tabloid editor, talent judge, and now TV host, Piers Morgan. At 28, Morgan became the youngest editor of the News of the World before moving to the Daily Mirror, but was famously sacked in 2004 over the authenticity of photos relating to the war in Iraq. He's been described as ambitious and supremely self-confident, and joined Simon Mann for what was, at times, a rather spiky chat.
Since the age of about 5, I've lived cricket, played it, watched it religiously, and to be honest, to be sitting here at Old Trafford in the middle of a test match doing this with you is a dream come true, actually.
Who did you play for?
I still play for a village called Newark in the East Sussex League down near Brighton. And in fact, I'm in pretty hot water today because we've got a big game today and they're not impressed and I'm fobbing off to be, tarting myself around the A-waves. So I'm not very popular down in my village.
How often do you play?
Oh, most weeks, yeah. I mean, obviously this American venture that I'm on has hammered my cricket schedule. But when I'm in England, I play every week.
What do you do?
Well, what I like to think I do, and what my colleagues would say are two different things. I bat mainly. I used to be a fast bowler. Then, as age took over, and wine, women, and song, I dropped to a medium pacer, then to off spin, and now I bowl leg spin because it's the only way I can get any form of control. But I'm mainly a batsman and very poor slip fielder.
Well, that happens as you get older, doesn't it?
It does, but I'm only 42. It's a bit worrying.
So when did you first have an interest in cricket? I mean, from the age of 6 or later?
I played at prep school, and then I remember very vivid. I was talking about it earlier actually with somebody about my first ever Test match was at Lord's in 1975, watching Lillian Thompson bowl at Dennis Amiss, and Davis Steele was playing, and
that would have been his first game.
Tony Gregg, yeah, it was,
Davis Steele.
And it was amazing watching this grey-haired old guy come out taking on the two fastest bowlers in the world. And I really just loved the sport from that day on. And I've got 3 sons now myself. They're cricket mad, which is great. But I was sitting downstairs with this guy who turned out to be Steve Harmison's dad in a box downstairs, and I was saying, God, what's it like for you at the moment? I said, it's bad enough for me when one of my sons is going through a rough patch, but to have a son who's sort of centre stage and having a difficult time must be really hard. He said it was, very difficult.
Do your sons play?
Yeah. They older boys are left arm, medium fast, Wasim Akram.
They're all left-handers.
No.
Left-armers.
Older one. The older
sorry.
one. He's nearly 14. Spencer, my middle son Stanley, is a leg spin bowler and opening bat. And the young one, the terror, is 6.5, Bertie. He bowls flat out fast. So we renamed him Bert Lee. But they're all fanatics, yeah. So I'm grooming them avidly. I want one of them to play for England. I don't mind which one, I've told them. But obviously, this has caused a bit of competition between them.
Well, it's a good way to create competition, isn't it?
Well, exactly.
Give them something to aim for.
Exactly.
Are they very talented, or are they moderately
I think they are. I mean, every dad thinks their son's the best player he's ever seen, obviously. But I think they've all got real natural eye for a ball. And because I'm so obsessed with cricket, then they have, fortunately, become equally obsessed. So, I'm very quietly optimistic, yeah.
Are they more obsessed with cricket than anything else?
Well, we're all Arsenal season ticket holders too, so don't start groaning. They're not that bad a team, but football is secondary. I always say to them, look, guys, you've got to remember, if you're ever asked, would you rather go to watch Arsenal in the Champions League final or England at Lord's, you must always say England at Lord's. It's just more civilised.
Even if you don't mean it.
Well, I don't want to be tested, put it that way.
Are you a great watcher of cricket?
Yeah, I love it, yeah. I took them to the World Cup in Antigua and go to the Lord's Test. Every year I go on the second day with my village friends who I've grown up with, and we get drunk and misbehave in one of the stands, and then the next day I go into Ian Botham's box, which is always great fun, riotous as you can imagine, and I love it. I could watch every day of every test. When we won the Ashes a couple of years ago, we'll forget the one we lost in the meantime, but the one we won, I was there for the last 4 days at the Oval, and greatest 4-day sport I've ever seen, I think.
You mentioned Ian Botham there. How has the fact that you were editor of the Mirror, and obviously a powerful position, has that given you access to the players?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of the players. I know Michael Vaughan pretty well. KP, Kevin Peterson very well. Freddie Flintoff, I spent the day at the races with him last week. Rather ironically, we went to the races. We were at Lancashire, Sussex, which got rained off for the day. And the world's media were trying to get Freddie because he just announced his new leg injury. And so I helped squirrel him to safety, which was a rather bizarre position to find myself in, dragging Freddie Flintoff away from the world's media. But it kind of worked, and we then had a disastrous afternoon at the races. I think it ended in particularly spectacular fashion when we put a small ransom on a horse called Flashing Floozy, which came last, which I thought summed up our day really and summed up his year.
What's it like being a former editor of a national newspaper at such a relatively young age? I mean, I mentioned earlier that you became editor of the News of the World at 28, which is incredibly young, isn't it?
Well, that's the polite way of describing my career. It's like youngest editor, for whatever it was, 50 years. Of course, there's another way of saying it, of youngest editor ever sacked. Full stop, which was not a career ambition I was hoping to achieve. But no, it's been, I edited newspapers for 11 years and I had the most fantastic time. And I wrote a book when I finished it, which was very cathartic. And as I wrote, I remember thinking, I don't have an angry or bitter or even frustrated bone in my body, because I was lucky enough to have covered really some extraordinarily huge stories in that time. And as I was getting towards the end of that period, I remember thinking, I've really just about done everything. And you should always leave a job with yourself wanting just a little bit more, but not too much more. So I felt that I went out for myself on the right note, really. I mean, if I could have scripted my exit, it would have been on a huge story, preferably involved with Iraq, where the Daily Mirror took a very strong anti-war position. Now, the provenance of those particular photographs that caused my downfall remains a bit of a mystery. No one has ever found out who really took them, why they took them, what they were really of. I don't think I can claim total vindication because, I don't actually know the truth about those pictures yet. I was told by the government that those pictures were false and a hoax.
Do you regret publishing them?
No, because this is the same government that told us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So I wouldn't necessarily take their word for anything, frankly.
What was it like meeting Rupert Murdoch at 28 when he said, I want you to be editor of the News of the World?
Very scary. Yeah, I remember it. I was flown to Miami and didn't know what on earth was going on. I was the pop editor of The Sun. And the Sun's...
You had no inkling at all?
No, The Sun's then infamous editor, Kelvin Mackenzie, said, Mr. Murdoch wants to see you in Miami. And I thought, what on earth for? And I remember this surreal moment of walking along Miami Beach with him. We both took our shoes and socks off and were sort of trotting through the surf, discussing world events, which for me was a very small conversation area, I can tell you at the time. And we never mentioned anything really, and then eventually we went to a party that evening, and I remember he turned to another executive of his from Fox Television and introduced me as the next editor of the News of the World, which was certainly news to me.
He was confident you were going to accept, was he?
Fairly confident, yeah. I guess it was one of those ones you weren't really going to say no to, but it was a very surreal weekend, and a very surreal existence for the following year, really. To be editing the world's biggest selling newspaper for Mr. Murdoch was incredibly thrilling.
What sort of reception did you get from your underlings, if you like, the people who you're now head of and made all the decisions in their lives?
I think it'd be fair to say there wasn't universal joy that their new editor was a spotty little geek who wrote about pop music and wore pinstripe suits and was young enough to be their grandson. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire, but we had a very extraordinary run of luck on stories, broke some huge stories, and I think that they realised that although I wasn't very experienced, I had that sort of fearlessness that comes with youth, and just went for it, and that was quite exciting and empowering, I think, for all the staff at the time, and they were a fantastic team of journalists.
Did you have a feeling then, I'm not really up to this, in your private moments, what have I landed myself with here?
I did, but I do think there's a lot of merit. It's interesting if you compare it to cricket, for example, that the younger you are, the more fearless you tend to be, the less encumbered you are by commitments, by other distractions, and by self-doubt. And I think that there's a lot to be said for plunging people into big arenas when they're younger rather than older, because they tend to worry less.
Were you up to it at the time, do you feel?
Probably not, no. I certainly wasn't equipped in terms of experience to do the job. I did have a lot of confidence in my abilities as a journalist, because I just don't think you can succeed in any profession, whether you're a cricketer or a politician or a journalist or anything, without a level of self-confidence, particularly in the modern media world, which is pretty ferocious. And so I didn't allow myself to show any self-doubt, even though obviously I would go home after some evenings and just think, what on earth have I got myself into? But in terms of what I showed the staff, I always try to be supremely self-confident, which I think you need from any leader of anything. And certainly an editor who's a bit twitchy about things generally tends to get the paper he deserves, which is one that's pretty inconsistent and pretty twitchy itself.
There'll be some people listening to this, in fact many people, who feel that a tabloid editor is, akin to the devil's son. I mean, how do you square with that? How do you cope with that? The fact that a lot of people perhaps even despise what you've done.
Well, a lot of that is a class thing, because tabloid papers tend to be read predominantly by the working classes in this country, who are the salt and earth of Britain. And I've got no problem with pompous middle upper class people taking a lofty high view of tabloid newspapers, because what they're effectively doing is taking a lofty high, rather pompous, privileged view of the working classes. And I will always defend tabloids and their readers for what they really are, which is, a wonderful, exciting, revelatory, informative, fun way of bringing the day's news and events to life. And, I've read the so-called serious newspapers all my life and been bored to tears by them most of the time. I have no problem in having edited papers that at least gave people a laugh in the morning.
Did you say that most journalists are morally bankrupt?
Yes.
And that's true, is it?
Yes. Well, you know it is. You're one of them.
I don't like to see myself like that.
I do think journalists work themselves into the most hilarious moral indignation about stuff, when, given what I know about most journalists' private lives, I mean, literally, there would not be enough trees in the Amazon rainforest to detail them. So I think there is, when you come out of it, as I have, I've been out of newspapers for 3 years now, so even though I still get introduced everywhere as former Mirror editor, I don't actually see myself anymore as part of that world necessarily, although I remain very proud of a lot of the stuff we did. But I do think that there is, you look at it from the outside and it's fairly absurd, the moral piety that comes with working for newspapers generally, and television and radio. We do collectively as the media whip ourselves into the most hilarious moral frenzies about stuff. And it's interesting working abroad as well, the different ways that different media and different ways that these things play in different countries, because in America they treat people in public life very differently to how they do in England. In England there's what I think is quite a healthy build them up, knock them down atmosphere that pervades about people. But
some people hate that though, don't they?
Well, they do, but I actually think, having worked in America, it's actually quite healthy, because in America it's the other way, where there's just universal adulation for anyone in public life. And you do feel that collective adulation for celebrity and famous people and stuff is pretty corrosive, actually, to a society and to a country. And I quite like the way that in England you have the media to keep people on their toes when they're in public life, and celebrities who get above their station. But at least we do have a media that's quite fearless and aggressive here, who will, prick the balloon from time to time.
So basically what you're saying is that the media will make mistakes, but overall it does a good job, because it needs to. In a democracy, you need that those checks and balances.
Well, there are very few countries, for example, where I, as editor of the Daily Mirror, could have launched such an aggressive, sustained campaign against the Iraq War, for example. I mean, if you go to someone like America, the media was pretty neutered over the Iraq War, and you do wonder if they had papers like the Daily Mirror doing what we did, that perhaps George Bush could have been reined in a bit. The media there only turned round really pretty well when it was far too late. And so I think we have a very free press in Britain. Now, it gets a bit of a bad rap, and the press here do go too far. They do sensationalise, they do make big mistakes, and when they do, they get pretty severely punished. But overall, I'd much rather have a free and quite anarchic press than to have a neutered one.
Have you made more friends than enemies, or more enemies than friends?
Probably half and half. I mean, I think if you embrace the media as I have, and I've made no problem of doing that. When I was on the Mirror editing a paper, we didn't have much money to spend on promotion and stuff, and I always thought if I could think of Wheezy to get on TV, then yes, it was I suppose a bit self-promoting, and I didn't mind that, because I've always quite enjoyed the limelight. But also, it got my paper talked about, and that can be predominantly a good thing. Occasionally, it would get you into trouble, I'm sure. But I've got no problem with that. I like the media world. I like doing interviews. interviews. I like, having time to go on things like Question Time and have rows with people. I'm aware if you do that and you're quite provocative and opinionated, then half the people that hear you are going to disagree with you and probably hate your guts. But the other half are always, fine about it and agree with you. So it swings and roundabouts.
Who have you fallen out with most spectacularly? He and his lot? Jeremy Clarkson?
I wouldn't have them round to dinner tomorrow, no. I mean, Hislop punched me 3 times. No, he tried to. No, he couldn't reach. Clarkson hit me 3 times in the head. And after
Did you deserve it?
Well,
what was that for?
I probably deserved it, yeah. We just kept running pictures of him with someone who wasn't Mrs. Clarkson in compromising positions, which I suppose in a funny way it ought to have been his fault, but it rapidly in his eyes became my fault. So when he saw me at the British Press Awards, he whacked me 3 times. But what I remember is I was trying to conjure up a sporting metaphor to deploy as the 3rd punch rained in. And I remember the words of Muhammad Ali to George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle. "Is that all you got, George?" And I turned to him, "Is that all you got, Jeremy?" Which he was quite sporting enough to put in his Sunday Times column. I mean, it was a bit like a scene out of Bridget Jones when Hugh Grant and Colin Firth are in the fountain. Handbags at dawn. All rather unedifying and quite embarrassing.
You got your revenge on him in the book, though, didn't you?
I did, yes.
You can tell the story.
Oh, I can, okay.
As long as you're careful.
Well, he came up with the best excuse ever for why he wasn't having an affair, which was he basically inferred impotence, which struck me as a pretty good excuse, I must say, but slightly unlikely.
And not true.
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask him. Maybe have him on, see what he says. We actually made up recently. Well, I wouldn't say completely made up. We met in a bar at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was one of those scenes where either we were going to hit each other again, because my family are quite army orientated, and they were pretty depressed that I'd been hit 3 times without retaliating. And but I thought you've got to be civilised about these things. So I walked over and shook his hand, and we had a bottle of wine. And he actually revealed that he'd broken his little finger on his hand punching me. And I showed him my scar on my head, and we were sort of showing off our war wounds. It was quite a proud moment for both of us, really. Very embarrassing for anybody else. For us, quite a proud moment.
How do you get on with Tony Blair?
Well, I always quite liked Tony Blair. I mean, he's a very charming guy when you meet him. I met him many, many times on the Mirror, 1-to-1, and got on very well with him. My big problem was that I always thought he ran the country as if he was still a QC or a lawyer, in that he would basically argue anything if the money was right. And, you look at Iraq, I mean, I really do believe that if Tony Blair had refused to support George Bush on Iraq, that war may never have happened. And it's been one of the most catastrophic foreign policy disasters, not just of our lifetime, of many lifetimes. So I just had huge problems with what he did with the country's foreign policy and the effect it's now having on us domestically. Even getting a flight up here today, the security that we now have to endure is all a direct result of this nonsense. I also had a bit of a problem with Mrs. Blair, who never saw eye to eye with me.
Didn't she? Is that right?
She what?
She tried to get you sacked, is that right?
She did try to get me sacked, yeah, which many of your listeners might think was a very good idea and might actually redeem her in their eyes. But I never really got on with Cherie. We just had this sort of a bit like 2 matchsticks in a dry field. It didn't take a lot to go off.
Does it make you feel powerful when you get to meet the Prime Minister a lot? You have that, I think, is it 56 times you've met him one-on-one?
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a powerful position to be in, isn't it?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I didn't really think about that at the time. I mean, towards the end, to be honest, this will sound really weird, but it used to get rather boring. And I would go down, number 52 meeting with Blair 1-to-1, and I'd get in and he'd say, hi, the paper's looking great, which he always said, lying. And then we'd talk about football and the weather and, a little bit about Iraq. And he'd say, you're going to sort of rein back? And I'd say no. And he'd say, okay, and shook my hand. And I'd go back to my office. Like anything, if you meet anyone enough times, eventually you just get rather bored with each other. So it's probably good for him and me that I departed. But I did have this memorable dinner when I left. And I went to have dinner with just Cherie and Tony for 2 hours in the flat at number 10, and that was very amusing because he was getting drunk with me, drinking lots of bottles of wine, and Cherie was drinking water, looking at me stony-faced. And it was this great moment, a bit like The Good Life, when she sort of turned to me and it was like Margot and Jerry and said, I said, come on, Cherie, why do you hate me so much? And she said, and Tony said, no, she doesn't, trying to calm things down. She said, I do, actually. I do. So I know, come on, I know you do. And it all turned out to be something about me writing a story years ago about her having bad skin, which apparently she was mortified by, and for that reason she needed my head on a plot, on a Well, actually, a pot would be right. A large boiling pot would have done it a favour, I think.
Well, people hate it when newspapers are really personal. I think that's probably a...
Yeah, the odd thing was the Mirror was never that personal about Sri. I mean, the Daily Mail used to crucify her, but the Mirror actually never was that bad about Sri. She just didn't like me personally. She said I had a dodgy moral compass. I wasn't quite sure what she meant by that. But anyway, I'm sure she was right.
What's life been like since leaving the Mirror?
Well, I've ended up judging Dancing Cows with David Hasselhoff in Hollywood, which I must say wasn't on my checklist of future jobs. So it's all been rather surreal. Yeah, I mean, tonight, we start Britain's Got Talent, to which I've tried to add the question mark to the title to make it more balanced. But I didn't honestly think I'd be judging things with Simon Cowell or blokes who put clothes pegs on their head or piano dancing pigs. But that's what I've ended up doing, and it's very entertaining.
How did that come about then?
Well, I've known Simon Cowell a very long time, and he just rang me up and said he needed somebody fairly obnoxious to go to America and be rude to Americans on a talent show. And he couldn't think of anyone better equipped than me to do the job.
Well, we actually had an email from Stephen Taylor who said, Piers Morgan's on a show called America's Got Talent where he's a judge. He excels at being very rude to the poor wretches who compete each week. All these shows seem to have a rude British judge.
I think it's obligatory in America now. You have to have this, they call us snarky. I never quite found out what snarky means, but I assume it means fairly obnoxious. I mean, it's a bit like playing a pantomime villain. The Americans get the joke because of Simon Cowell being so successful out there. It's all a bit tongue-in-cheek. They expect us to be amusingly rude, not too personally rude, just about their acts. I mean, you've got to remember, you are seeing some extremely deluded people who genuinely think their act's worth $1 million when it wouldn't probably be worth a subway ride home. So I do say a duty and responsibility to put them back on the straight and narrow.
Is this show huge out there?
Well, it started again on the second season. Started on Tuesday to record ratings. You'll be appalled to hear, and it's the #1 show in America.
Coming here.
It's coming here. So yes, I'm afraid it's not good for fans of mine out there, of which there are one or two. They're going to have to hide for a bit.
You've had that 3 years since you were sacked. I mean, you talk to sportsmen, rock stars who drop out of the public eye, they retire. Do you feel that you, in a way you've done the best thing you're going to do in your life?
Yeah, I do.
The most satisfying thing.
Yeah, totally. I don't know about most satisfying. I don't know. I mean, certainly my ambition was to be a journalist, and then my ambition was to work on a national newspaper, and then it was absolutely to be an editor of a national newspaper. And I was incredibly lucky to achieve my ambition at 28 and to do it for 11 years. So I really achieved my ambition very young and had a wonderful time doing it. I have no regrets. I think I got out just as I was getting bored, and that's a good time for me and the paper. And my energy was beginning to be diverted towards other things like television and stuff, which I really enjoy too. And also, I would never have written the books I've done in the last couple of years if I hadn't left the paper and left editing. And I thoroughly enjoyed doing the books and want to keep doing those, the diaries. And I really enjoy doing the TV stuff. Being a talent show judge is great fun. And other people have always had this sort of weird insistence on me that I ought to do something more serious. But I've never felt the need to be any great homme sérieux. I mean, I just like having a good time.
Would you like to go back to newspaper editing?
Well, I think newspapers are changing very fast, so the nature of what you would be doing is really evolving by the day. And all newspaper sales are going through the floor. Everything's migrating to the internet. I mean, I think there might be excitement in perhaps being the first editor of an online newspaper, but whether you would want to actually put yourself into running a national newspaper now in the current market conditions, which are extremely difficult, I think I'd find it very tiring. And also I'd think like probably a cricketer who gave up and then went back 3 or 4 years later, probably thinking, why have I done this? I've already been through this mill and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Why go back into something when you've quit really at the right time? Which psychologically, I think I quit when I felt ready to move on. So I think it would take an awful lot to persuade me to go back to newspapers.
Is it a really demanding life?
It's incredibly demanding. I mean, I have so much more free time now. Yeah. The ability to go to bed and turn your phone off cannot be underrated after 11 years of being woken at 3 in the morning, and changing front pages. All incredibly exciting, but incredibly draining on your body. They say for every editor who goes past 50 editing, it's about 5 years of your life. And I understand why, because it's relentless. It's 7 days a week. I'd come to a cricket match like this and you'd be spending most of the day fielding calls, planning things. And also, when you're in that world, everything seems so incredibly magnified in its importance. When you come out, you realise that most people don't read newspapers like it's the end of their world. They read it for a quick resume of the world events, a bit of a laugh, a bit of entertainment, and do the crossword. And when you're on the other side of it, preparing these things, it seems like you are absolutely consumed with the vitality of every word that comes out, and that actually is not how most people on the outside view it.
What's going on in your private life?
All sorts of mayhem. You really don't want to go there on Test Match Special.
Well, I asked that
far too early in the morning.
I suppose I asked that question because I've seen some old clippings from newspapers that we've dug out. Or some recent ones that we've dug out, and there have been some stories about your own private life. How have you reacted to the fact that people have got interested in your private life when you used to get interested in
Simon, let's cut to the quick. If you wish to invade my privacy on Test Match Special, you're going to have to just be brave about it and pile in. Come on, now's your chance. Don't hold back. I wouldn't.
Okay, who are you seeing now?
Celia Walden.
Okay.
A lovely girl.
And how long has that been going on for?
Quite a while.
And have you been seeing anyone else while that's been going on?
Absolutely not.
Right. So you're happy privately,
You're quite good at this. You see, you could be a tabloid journalist. You shouldn't ease off, though. You've got me on the rack. Come on.
Where's it going?
Hopefully very far. Yeah, I could think of a lot worse places to be going.
And the kids get on with her?
They're all very friendly.
It's interesting, isn't it? What's interesting is this interview's been bowling along. I've been asking you questions, and your answers have been lasting for about a minute or so.
And now I'm clamming up.
Private life, you're clamming up.
Well, I'm more than happy to start asking you about yours.
Happily married?
Now, come on. Let's get back to more serious matters, Simon.
There we go. You see? There you go. Well,
like all
that's instructive.
Look, like all tabloid journalists, you have to understand we're rank hypocrites, and the last thing we ever want are the turrets turned on us. The only fortunate position I have is that most of my friends now edit other tabloid newspapers, and I know where all the bodies are buried, so I'm sort of fairly protected.
Have the papers been
you,
after
however,
you,
are in a more difficult position, Simon.
Have the papers been after you? Do they follow you around?
They have actually, and in fact, last week I had the absolute joy of being pursued by 2 carloads of paparazzi through the streets of London. Terribly exciting, I have to say. And we got to Chelsea Harbour, and they didn't realise that only black cabs can get through, not ordinary cars. It's some elitist thing down there. And they tried to get through, were stopped, and then 2 of them got out and began running after our cab, which I thought was heroic, actually, given that we were going 40 miles an hour, and they were both in their 50s. But they did get a couple of sneaky snaps, which then appeared in the Mail on Sunday, and I was delighted, to be honest. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed being pursued, thoroughly enjoyed being papped, love having my privacy invaded, and don't really see what the problem is, really.
Do you really mean that, do you?
I do mean it, yeah. In America, I remember being in the makeup room with David Hasselhoff, my co-judge, and one morning the National Enquirer out there, the real scandal sheet, exposed me, dark past of talent star, and it was all stuff I'd put in my own book, and all he was dodgy, share tipper, he faked Iraqi photos, all this kind of nonsense. And then Hasselhoff was waiting for me with a huge grin, saying, "They got you, man. They got you, you tabloid scumbag." And I said, "Yeah, they did." I said, "They gave me whole of page 8. Can you believe it?" And he went, "What, you pleased?" I said, "Pleased. I'm delighted." I said, "And by the way, did you notice what they called me, David?" And he said, "What do they call you?" I said, "Well, they didn't just call me a star judge on America's Got Talent. They called me the star judge." At which point, you've never seen a man move faster to his agent than David Hasselhoff. Furious. So it was all fair and love and war.
So that's the way to play it, really. That's how you'd advise.
Oh, God, I just think...
Just to go with it.
Honestly, I spent years listening to celebrities squealing about invasion of privacy and the paparazzi and all that kind of nonsense. And I hear Hugh Grant every 3 weeks telling us how he hates fame and doesn't want to make any more movies, and then he forces himself to make another one and forces himself to go to premieres and forces himself to pose for the pictures, and you sort of think, look, mate, if it's really that grueling, why don't you just stop making them? And Keira Knightley last week said you have to go on a retreat. She's 19, isn't she, or something? Had to go on a retreat somewhere to recover from the stresses of fame. Well, I wouldn't worry too much. You're in Pirates of the Caribbean, you got lucky. Enjoy it. It's very depressing hearing celebrities whine about fame. When you think about the lives of... Look at most of the audience here today watching at Old Trafford. Most of them work damn hard for their lives, don't earn vast amounts of money, don't have limousines, bodyguards, and wonderful, glamorous lives. And yet they're probably very cheerful with their lot, not miserable and whining all the time.
Well, we could talk forever and ever, I think.
I've got all afternoon.
Unfortunately, the cricket's
really beginning to enjoy it, actually.
Just one final point. Do you know... I'm not sure how you pronounce his surname, actually. Jeremy Maylis. I'm the local cricket correspondent for Piers Morgan's Village Side, the Sussex Express.
Yes.
He's a really competent cricketer.
Thank you.
And is being falsely modest. Bowls tidily and sets intelligent fields.
Well, there you are. You see, modesty was always my byword.
Well, it's been great talking to you. It's been great fun.
Oh, it's great fun. And let's hope KP smacks 100 this afternoon to complete the joy.
Yeah, and England on top here, 136. How do you see the the game going from here?
I think Peterson's going to smack 100. I think he's the most exciting batsman this country's produced in 50 years. And the fact that he's abrasive and cocky, great. Great, about time. I wish they were all like that.
And you know him reasonably well, don't you?
I know him very well, and I texted him this morning saying, look, mate, I'm travelling halfway across Britain to watch you bat. I'm on Test Match Special. It's a big day for me and a big day for you. Don't cock it up.
And what was his response?
He said, shut up, you muppet. Texted me.
That's probably a good point at which to end, actually.
A muppet retires.
Thanks very much. Piers Morgan on
It's
A
been
View
a
from the
pleasure.
Boundary.
Thank you.